Here we are,
Oh, Sarah, how are
back
you?
again. I'm good. I'm good. Today's Recover Zing podcast is about what's it about? Power and powerlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating and horrendous when you feel powerless.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I'm very curious to have a conversation around what is the feeling of powerlessness that people speak about. So I hear a lot of it, people that have named that they have love addiction, maybe have gone to 12-step rooms or etc. And, it is said that you are powerless over the other person. So I'm
mm,
really curious to have that conversation to make it maybe a little bit more clear as to what's going on, because it makes sense on one level. If you have a chemical recovery under your belt, you know what it feels like and it looks like to be powerless over a substance.
mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit more tricky to describe what powerlessness looks like in relation to another person. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's it's a big topic, but maybe we can have a
Mm.
quick conversation about it. And
Oh,
I'll give you my 2 cents on it, and then maybe you can give me your 2 cents on it.
absolutely, Sarah Gilligan.
I think maybe the thing that has always struck me is that when we think about powerlessness in relation to love addiction, what I hear is the want to maybe point the finger over at the other person and what the other person is doing
Mm-hmm.
and the other person's life. And let's be clear, it is very true. You don't have power over what other people choose to do in their life or make decisions around or choose to pursue, whatever it might be. That is when
Mm,
somebody is in their own life, inhabited in their own life, and are making informed decisions for themselves, they will do those things. And
mm-hmm.
in love addiction, that may feel and seem like abandonment.
Mm,
But I think when we talk about being powerless, there's powerlessness over the person, there's also powerlessness over the addiction itself. So the addiction
mm-hmm.
takes hold and is in charge. You barely, sometimes when you're in active love addiction, you don't even realize that that's what's going on. So you are
Mm-hmm.
powerless. All of your decisions, actions, reactions are all rooted through the addiction, the powerlessness
Mm,
of you react to the other person all the time,
mm,
whatever, whoever that person
mm-hmm.
is. But there's something in terms of like identifying that you're powerless over, the ex-partner, the partner, whatever it might be, the person that is the object of your love addiction and what they do, and that you have now begun the process of creating some semblance of understanding that this is happening and that you can then make decisions for yourself to mind yourself around those things instead of
Mm,
pointing the finger. Because we've got to that point by pointing the finger and then not taking action in our own lives, which is what the addiction wants.
mm,
When you sit and you listen to people, it's like, okay, you don't have power over what that person has decided to do. You feel this way about it, which is probably horrendous,
mm,
even though maybe nothing has actually happened to you, but there's something going on. That trauma has kicked off. So now you have the power to reach out to somebody, maybe if you have a couple of trusted people, or you do have the power to identify what that is, identify the feeling, try and self-soothe a little bit, breathe, come back to the moment. So then you get to take yourself out of the addictive process, which then becomes powerless again, where then we start pointing the finger over at the other person. That's
mm,
my understanding of it, which may
mm,
seem convoluted. Maybe you can say it
mm,
in a simpler way, but I'm
mm.
curious to throw it over to you.
Yeah, power and powerlessness. What I mean, we know that, don't we? Just like you described, all addiction is about powerlessness and the illusion of power. So, powerlessness and the illusion of power. So, if you ask somebody who's snorting cocaine every night, do you think you're powerless or do you think you've power? They will absolutely, to the most part, most definitely, if the addiction is still working for them, they will say, I have full power to decide whether I'm going to blow the stuff up my nose tonight or not. I'm in control. I have the power.
Mm.
So it isn't until many, many levels of devastating consequences come into play that maybe somewhere along the way, that person who is in full blown addiction will start to understand that there is some break between their own perception of power and the actual reality of their powerlessness. So that's when we start to develop consequences around our addiction. It's usually when, like when we see people having an intervention where a family sits around and points out the 200 reasons why it's a good idea this person stops using their addiction, from lost jobs to broken marriages to traumatized children to just nightmare situations, that somehow that person might start to understand, hold on a minute, do I actually have the power as to whether I put this stuff up my nose every night or not? It might be the first time the person's ever even questioned the fact of whether they have power or not. So that's really obvious in a chemical addiction. It's like, there's the drug, there are the consequences, here's the nightmare of your life.
Mm.
But in love addiction, there's no drug to point at. Nobody's going to come in. To the most part, I have still yet to meet anybody. Could you believe this after all the years I've worked in this field, and you have too, Sarah? I've still yet to meet anybody who's had an intervention for a love addict, ever.
Never.
Like a family that has, oh God, my dog. A family who sat down and said, listen, your life is a disaster and here are all the reasons why. And you have to stop your love addiction. I've just never ever seen it. No.
Never.
So love addiction continues, goes on, has like loads of repercussions. So it goes from the person setting out early on, coming out of a traumatic childhood, to trying to start the first fumbling steps of getting into a relationship, to very quickly finding out that all these traumatic landmines are lying in their psyche. Things like, I can't be without this person. I have to be attached to this person at all times. I can't let this person out of my sight. I have to completely engulf this person. I have to become completely one with this person.
Mm.
And all these things are typified by me believing this is love.
Mm.
So all of this construct of the love addiction starts to take off. Now, the person has no concept that they are now in an addictive process. So they have no understanding at this point that they are beginning and starting in a powerless place around the concept of love.
Mm.
So it's practically impossible for a person in love addiction to understand that they're in a place of powerlessness until they get to a place of serious, genuine, informed professional support, usually.
Mm.
Where somebody who's actually a professional can say, listen, I believe that you are possibly a love addict, and these are all the reasons why. That's backed up by actual data and research and actual reality.
Mm.
To the most part, the person's just out there flailing around, trying to make love work where it's not working, not understanding that they're even in an addictive process.
Mm.
So, power and powerlessness, as it proceeds in the relationship, it just gets more and more and more destructive, because essentially love addiction by its very essence is about one person losing complete control, which is the love addict, and usually the avoidant partner having the illusion of being in complete control and power. But we will find out later this is not the fact either.
Mm.
But for the love addict, they are just continually losing more and more and more power to the partner and to the relationship, all the while believing they're in a lot of power because they are loved.
Mm. Terrifying. And confusing.
Was that confusing what I just
No, no,
described?
very clear, but
Oh,
such a
yeah.
confusing process. The
Oh,
idea,
yeah.
I think that's the it's so incredible to have this conversation, because the word powerlessness is a difficult one to try to describe in relation to love addiction when you don't really know what it is. because you think because you don't feel triggered or traumatized in the relating piece that everything's great. You're fantastic. Everything's fantastic until the other person, who's generally an avoidant partner, we'll get to that part at another point, until that person starts to make decisions in their life separate to the other person. And that's generally when you start to feel that the reverberations of powerlessness, because there's like a flailing about that starts to happen internally. You do not have full 100% control over the situation at all. In fact, you have zero and zero power really to do anything about it, because you are in the addictive cycle, but you don't know that until something different starts to happen within the relationship itself. And then the wheels start to come off the bus very quickly. And then the powerlessness piece starts to be felt. So I think it's so good in that description. That's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
trying to describe that to somebody who really doesn't know that they're actually in an addictive cycle is difficult.
Mm-hmm. It's really difficult. It's also really difficult on so many levels because I'm just getting an image of talking to like a bunch of therapists in Dublin about love addiction, where, I was brought in as the kind of the guinea pig client to talk about it. This was very early in my own recovery. And there was probably 80 therapists in the room, and they were utterly bemused, flabbergasted, had no idea what I was talking about
Mm.
because there was no really, harsh evidence available for them to point at the fact that this was actually, yes, an addiction, because it's subtle and pernicious. So it's subtle and pernicious. So it's all encompassing, all permeating, but it's very subtle, even for the professionals to spot it.
Absolutely. And I can speak about that ad nauseum, as you know, around what happens therapeutically is a lot of people get stuck talking in terms of attachment styles, avoidant attachment, anxious attachment. And it's really helpful information to know, but it doesn't give you a map to walk out of it always. When you talk about love addiction, there's component parts involved, but love addiction goes beyond those attachment styles. There's really interesting information there. And I think often what happens is in therapy, somebody can be coming to the therapeutic room speaking to somebody about this issue, this relating issue. They know they have an issue. They know that there's something wrong. They feel terrible. The partner isn't doing what they want. They're both in therapy, maybe. They're being dragged into couples therapy, but they keep,
Mm,
this is coming back to where somebody chooses to live their life. It's like the issue is not that the other person is living their life. The issue is that the other person, you are in a state of love addiction and in a powerless state to do anything about your own life. But
mm-hmm,
the beam was always placed on the other person, or the beam was always placed on the relationship to try and fix something. When
mm,
you're actually trying to, what you're trying to fix is an addictive process, which we don't really want to fix. We want to make it a healthy process,
mm,
which requires an entirely different set of eyes brought to the relationship itself and to the person. So it
mm,
gets, people can be going to therapy for years talking about this thing, but it's never identified
mm-hmm,
as love
mm-hmm,
addiction. And that's just horrible, right? It's just
mm-hmm,
horrific.
mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, you have 80 maybe therapists sitting in a room. I can imagine that that can happen. Unless they
Yeah.
themselves have gone through some kind of love addiction recovery, I'm not sure it's going to be
Mm,
seen.
yeah. And here's the zingy piece, which is wonderful around this, is that like, wow, like capital WOW. Like, what about if there was an actual answer to a lifetime of traumatic relating? Like, you know, you and I both know as love addicts, if only we had known, if only somebody had said when I was 16 or you were 17, hey, guess what? You've got this thing. It's called love addiction. This is what you have to do to recover. And from then on in, you can have, to the most part, fairly stable, regular, run of the mill, fairly normy relationships that the rest of the population seemingly is somehow entitled to. And
Yeah.
you don't have to compulsively repeat absolutely damning, exquisitely destructive relationships time and time again.
Oh, game changer. It would have been a game changer.
Wouldn't it?
Imagine. Yeah. But wow, that that is possible.
Yeah, like wow, that, if you're out there and you're listening and you're thinking, God Almighty, there's something I'm missing. There's something I'm hugely missing here. What is it?
Mm.
Because this just couldn't be regular, normal relating. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
extraordinary to be able to recognize, just to have that little shaft of light in that place where it feels very, very, very dark. That, oh,
Mm.
wait a second. There's some words around this. There's a path. There's something
Yeah.
available. There's some information that's solid. Okay. And then you can
Yep.
take steps. And we will get
Yeah.
into this, I think, a huge amount. And I know we have in our previous conversations, which people can obviously go back and watch on Instagram, or
Yeah.
they don't include microphones and they do
Ah,
include some background noise from sitting in a garden. But the information is there, and it's really, it is the zing part. It's like, oh my God, this ship can be turned around.
yeah,
It
can.
doesn't always have to go towards Titanic levels of sinking.
Right. P.S. I was just in Belfast staying in
Oh,
the
that's
Titanic Hotel last week. So that's kind of
oh my
interesting.
God. Yeah,
The
totally.
Titanic Hotel in Belfast.
Oh my.
Correct.
And
It
also,
doesn't
just to
have to be.
say, inclusive of everybody, and as a queer person, everybody, like straight people get lesbians, straight people, men, women, everybody has access to this. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. The
Yeah.
recovery is accessible to everybody. And I think that's something that I certainly want to put out there, which is this is not, it doesn't, it's not going to cost a lot, and it is accessible to everybody to do this
Hmm.
successfully,
Absolutely.
which is so
That's
wonderful.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, what a message. Yes, it is totally possible to recover from it.
100%.
You just need the right help and the right supports
Right
all
help,
the
right
way.
supports, right information. That's it. And I hopefully, and that's exactly, I think, what we're going to try and do as much as possible. Yeah, I'm just watching it
Yeah.
getting darker and darker.
Darker and
Actually,
darker and
such an amazing,
darker.
so
Oh,
extra. I love it. Whereas I look like I'm about to sing everybody a song, which I'm not, thankfully.
you could. Yeah, it's getting
Great.
darker and
It.
darker. Yeah,
So that's really helpful for you. It's very, very helpful. Um, it's just helpful in general to hear it and to really simplify it on some level. And
yeah.
great. Uh, maybe we'll leave it at that.
Perfect.
Yeah,
We'll come back again.
we'll
Yeah.
be back ASAP.
Okay. All
Okay.
right, Sarah, get again. Well, have a good rest of your evening.
You too. Getting darker.
Okay.